The ink on the marriage contract was still wet, but to the Duke of Montgomery it looked less like a signature and more like a death sentence. Julian Thorne stood by the window of his study, watching the rain lash against the glass. Below, in the courtyard, a carriage was being unloaded. Trunks of silk, boxes of lace, and crate after crate of dowry gold were being carried into his crumbling ancestral home. He should have been relieved. The gold would fix the roof. It would pay the servants who hadn't seen a wage in 6 months. It would save the Montgomery line from extinction. But Julian did not feel relief. He felt bought. He had sold his title to a merchant's daughter. Her name was Elara Vance. He had met her exactly twice. Once to negotiate the price of her hand with her father, a man who smelled of spices and greed, and once at the altar, where she had stood trembling beneath a veil thick enough to hide her face. He hadn't lifted the veil. He hadn't wanted to see the face of the transaction. A knock at the door broke his brooding. "Your Grace?" The butler's voice was soft. "Her Grace? The Duchess? She is waiting in the dining room." Julian sighed. The Duchess. The title sounded wrong. It belonged to his mother, a woman of grace and fire, not to a stranger who had purchased her way into the peerage. "Tell her I am not hungry," Julian said coldly. "But, sir, it is your wedding night. Tell her," Julian snapped, turning back to the window, "that I have business to attend to. She may dine alone." He listened to the butler's footsteps retreat. He knew he was being cruel. He knew it was not Elara's fault that her father had deep pockets and social ambitions. But Julian was a man in mourning. He was mourning the boy he used to be, the boy who believed in love, in destiny, in the magic of the woods behind the manor. That boy had died the day the debts came due. Downstairs in the vast candlelit dining room, Elara Vance sat at the head of a table set for 20. She looked at the empty chair opposite her. She looked at the cold roast pheasant. She didn't cry. She wasn't the crying sort. She reached out and picked up her wine glass. Her hand trembled slightly, causing the red liquid to ripple. She took a sip, steeling herself. "He hates me," she whispered to the empty room. It was to be expected. She was a commoner. He was a duke. But Elara knew something Julian did not. She knew that this wasn't a transaction. It was a rescue mission. She pulled up the sleeve of her silk gown. There, on the inside of her wrist, pale against her skin, was a scar. It was white, jagged, and shaped like a starburst. She traced it with her thumb, a habit she'd kept for 20 years. He doesn't remember, she thought. How could he? It was a lifetime ago. The next morning, the war of silence began. Julian treated Elara with impeccable, icy politeness. He bowed when she entered the room. He asked about her comfort, but he never looked her in the eye. He spent his days riding the estate, inspecting the repairs that her money was paying for, and his nights locked in the library. Elara, however, was not content to be a ghost in her own home. She began to work. She ignored the sneers of the housekeeper, who thought a merchant's daughter shouldn't know how to read a ledger. Elara took over the accounts. She found the errors in the grain shipments. She negotiated better prices for the wool. She worked until her fingers were stained with ink, trying to prove that she was more than just a purse. One evening, 3 weeks into the marriage, Julian returned late. He was soaked to the bone, his boots muddy. He walked into the library and stopped. Elara was there. She was on her knees by the fireplace, trying to light a fire with damp wood. Her hair had escaped its pins. She had a smudge of soot on her cheek. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, startled. "Where are the servants?" "I gave them the night off," Elara said, not looking up. "It is the harvest festival in the village. They deserve to dance." Julian frowned. "You are the Duchess of Montgomery. You should not be scrubbing grates." Elara finally got a spark to catch. She sat back on her heels, blowing gently on the flame. "Fire does not care about titles, Julian," she said calmly. "It only cares about fuel. And this house is cold." Julian looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time he saw past the expensive dress. He saw the curve of her neck, the determination in her jaw, the soot on her face that made her look less like a duchess and more like something familiar. Something tugged at his memory. A scent, not perfume, but something earthy, rain and bluebells. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. "I can light the fire," he said stiffly. "It is already lit," Ilara smiled. A small, triumphant smile. She stood up, brushing the ash from her skirts. As she moved, her sleeve slipped up. Julian caught a flash of white on her wrist. "What is that?" he asked, stepping closer. Ilara flinched. She pulled her sleeve down quickly. Nothing. A scratch. Julian's eyes narrowed. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "Let me see." "No," Ilara said, backing away. "I must check the kitchen. Good night, Your Grace." She fled the room. Julian stood by the fire, watching the flames dance. Why had she run? And why did the sight of her frightened eyes make his chest ache with a phantom pain he couldn't name? The turning point came a week later. The estate was in danger again. A creditor from London, a man named Silas Vane, Ilara's own cousin, had arrived with a new claim. Apparently, Julian's father had gambled away not just the money, but the water rights to the river. If Silas took the river, the tenant farmers would starve, the estate would die. Julian sat in his study, a pistol on the desk. He saw no way out. He had married for money, and it still wasn't enough. He was a failure. The door opened. Ilara walked in. She didn't knock. She walked straight to the desk. She picked up the pistol. "What do you think you are doing?" Julian rasped, reaching for it. "I am unloading it," Ilara said coolly. She deftly removed the shot and powder, placing the weapon in a drawer. "Suicide is a coward's exit, Julian, and I did not marry a coward." Julian laughed bitterly. "You married a ruin, Ilara. Silas wants the river. Without it, we are nothing." "Silas wants money," Ilara corrected him. "He doesn't care about water. He cares about leverage." She pulled a folded document from her pocket and slammed it onto the desk. "This is the deed to the river rights," she said. Julian stared at the paper. "How?" Silas held the bond. "I visited him this morning," Ilara said. "I traded him." "Traded him?" Julian stood up. "With what? We have no money left." "I traded him my jewellery," Ilara said quietly. "The diamonds my father gave me. The emeralds, all of it." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "That was your inheritance, your security. If I die, that was all you had." "I bet on the horse, not the racetrack." Ilara shrugged, her voice steady. "I bet on you, Julian. I believe you can make this land profitable again. I believe in the man who rides out in the rain to check on his tenants." Julian walked around the desk. He felt a storm breaking inside him. He had treated this woman with cold indifference, and she had just sold her future to save his. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Ilara looked down at her hands. "Because you are not a stranger to me, Julian." Thunder rumbled outside. The lights flickered and died. The storm had arrived. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the flashes of lightning illuminating the room in strobe-light bursts. "I don't understand," Julian said in the dark. Ilara didn't answer. She moved to the window, watching the rain. "Do you remember the woods?" she asked softly. "The woods behind the manor?" Julian frowned. "Yes, I played there as a boy. Do you remember the day you found the girl? The girl who had fallen from the great oak?" Julian froze. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He was 10 years old. He was running through the ferns. He heard a cry. He found a girl, a small thing with dirt on her face, clutching her arm. Blood was everywhere. She had cut her wrist on a jagged branch. He had ripped his own shirt, his fine linen shirt, to bind the wound. He had held her hand while she cried. He had walked her all the way to the edge of the woods, where the merchant wagons were parked. "Don't cry," the boy had told her. "Soldiers are brave. You are brave." "I'm not a soldier," the girl had sniffled. "I'm just a girl." "Then be a warrior princess," the boy had said. "And one day, when I am Duke, I will find you, and I will marry you, and you will never be hurt again." Julian stared at the back of his wife's head. "The merchant's daughter," he breathed. "It was you." Ilara turned. A flash of lightning lit up her face. She looked vulnerable, stripped of her defences. "I waited," she whispered. "I waited 20 years, Julian. I kept the piece of your shirt. I slept with it under my pillow." Julian took a step forward. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were angry," Ilara said, her voice cracking. "You looked at me with such hate at the altar. You didn't want me. You wanted the gold. I thought, if I told you, you would think I manipulated this, that I trapped you." "You trapped me?" Julian laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "Ilara, you saved me. You have been saving me every day for a month." He closed the distance between them. He reached out and took her hand. He turned it over. "Show me," he commanded gently. Ilara hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve. In the flash of lightning, the scar glowed silver. The starburst, the mark of the branch, the mark of the day their souls had first touched. Julian traced the scar with his thumb. He felt the ridge of the skin. It was real. She was real. The ghost he had been mourning. The boy he thought was dead. He wasn't dead. He was standing right here. And the girl he had promised to protect had just saved his life. "I broke my promise," Julian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I said you would never be hurt again, and I have hurt you every day of this marriage with my silence." Ilara shook her head. "You were drowning, Julian. It is hard to be kind when you cannot breathe." Julian looked into her eyes. He saw the patience there, the endurance, the love that had survived 20 years of silence and separation. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. "Can you forgive the fool who didn't recognize his own heart?" "There is nothing to forgive," Ilara said softly. "The boy gave me a bandage. The man gave me a home." Julian pulled her into his arms. It wasn't the polite embrace of a duke. It was the desperate hold of a drowning man finding land. He kissed her. He kissed the soot on her cheek. He kissed the scar on her wrist. He kissed her lips, tasting the salt of her tears and the sweetness of the rain. "I will earn this," Julian vowed against her mouth. "I will earn every penny you spent. I will earn every year you waited. I am not just the Duke of Montgomery anymore, Ilara. I am your husband." The storm raged all night, but for the first time in years the manor was warm. The next morning, the servants were surprised to see the Duke and Duchess at breakfast. They were sitting close together. The Duke was pouring her tea, and when he looked at her, his eyes didn't hold the cold distance of a stranger. They held the reverence of a man looking at a miracle. They rebuilt the estate together. The river flowed, the crops grew, and the debts were paid. But the most valuable thing in Montgomery Manor wasn't the gold in the vault or the paintings on the wall. It was a small, tattered strip of linen shirt, framed in silver, hanging above the fireplace in the master bedroom. A reminder that some promises are written not in ink, but in blood and destiny. Julian almost threw away his happiness because he was too proud to look closely at the person saving him. He let his prejudice against her new money blind him to her ancient nobility of spirit. It makes you wonder about the connections we miss in our own lives. How many times have we walked past a soulmate because they didn't look the way we expected? How many promises have we forgotten that the universe is still trying to keep? If you believe that true love can survive time, distance, and even our own stupidity, press that like button. Let's mark this story as a beacon for the hopeless romantics. And if you want to hear more stories about secrets, scandals, and the love that defies them all, subscribe to the channel. We are building a library of the human heart, one story at a time. Tell me in the comments, do you have a scar of promise, a memory or an object from your childhood that you still hold on to? I'd love to hear your story.